Hello, and welcome to Tech Connects, Dice's podcast where we dig into topics on tech hiring, recruiting, and careers that matter to you. I'm your host, Nick Kolakowski, and I'm going to talk to great guests every month about the current state of the tech careers world, including the tech job market, the hottest tech skills, what companies are doing to attract and retain technologists in a historically tight market, and much, much more. As you'll see in a few minutes, our guest today is Stephen Brand, who's the head of employer brand at Mambu, a rapidly growing fintech company. Brand also has tons of fans online, including on LinkedIn, where he regularly posts his thoughts on the evolution of employer branding. As a term, employer branding has existed since the 90s, and it encompasses the steps an organization can take to position itself as a great place to work. When an organization's employer branding succeeds, it helps bring in talent that not only has the right skills, but also integrates well into the company's culture. During our chat, Stephen's going to break down why employer branding can serve as a company's secret weapon, so to speak, reducing attrition and dissatisfaction, boosting engagement and productivity, and ultimately helping drive an influx of great talent. So I wanted to talk about, obviously, employer branding and, fintech and everything that you're doing at Mambu and so on with regard to that. And just to have an interesting discussion around, the value of an employer value proposition, not to get too redundant in terms of that and branding and things like that. So it's interesting because I've been looking at a lot of data lately about demand for technologists, data scientists, software engineers, and everybody along those lines. And finance and fintech are always bang dead at the top in terms of demand. There's all these finance companies out there, all these fintech firms and so on that are always looking for top talent. And that comes despite all, the huge headlines about cryptocurrency firms going down and whatnot. Those headlines aside, it seems that fintech is really huge, which I imagine for somebody like you, when you're the global head of shaping employer brand and trying to attract people in and trying to tell this story and so on, it must make it, there's obviously a lot of opportunity out there, but it also must make it really difficult. How do you tell that story? How do you sort of differentiate yourself amidst all the noise out there and all the chaos? It must be, on a tactical and strategic level, it must be a huge issue.
Yeah, no, undoubtedly. You're fighting, as you mentioned, you're fighting not only those that you would look at and say, well, they're direct competitors, as in they are also fintechs of an approximate size in the approximate same market. But as you'll know, every bank, every professional services, and everybody wants technologists. So you're really fighting pretty much every organization on the planet. I think just from a fintech point of view, in terms of separating yourself from the noise, I think, what we have to do, and kind of what I've always believed my role is that I don't necessarily tell the story. I don't even, to a massive degree, necessarily shape the story. My role is just to provide the circumstances under which individuals that do work here and that are experiencing life here are able to talk about that and are empowered and encouraged and want to do that. And I think that gives you your differentiation in a way that you couldn't, or that it's really difficult to sum up in a tagline in a marketing campaign. I think it has to be heard direct from the people that are experiencing it, and that's where the distinction is. And it might be micro, these tiny little differences, these tiny little ways that people experience the culture here that will resonate or not with the audience. But I think it has to come direct from those individuals, because that gives you the distinction, but it also gives you the credibility. And if I say it and I jump on the corporate channels and start banging on about what a life here is like and how amazing it is, no one's giving that any credibility, and I'm not reaching anyone. Whereas if it comes from those who are experiencing it, it carries a weight of credibility, as well as that sort of authenticity, that sort of human touch, that sense of, being able to make a human connection that I think candidates are probably looking for particularly when they're weighing up offers that might, be broadly similar in terms of what the training package looks like, what the comp looks like, location, where is the difference? And sometimes it's just in, maybe a sense you get from the people you hear from. Do they sound happy? Do they sound like the kind of people you could work with? So I think, yeah, that's it really is kind of a little bit getting out of the way, but just creating the circumstances that the stories kind of make their way out, rather than us doing anything to create them, curate them, to do anything of that kind of work.
The it's really interesting to me just because it, it, I hate the word institution. I hate the word institutional, but in terms of getting the company, the brand, the people internally to buy in on this, to want to convey their stories, to show what it's like. How do you get? I mean, how do you sort of get the internal buy-in behind it? How do you how do you convince people that this is worth doing, especially when the KPIs might not be the same as, revenue or whatever. And then how do you sort of get people enthusiastic about it? How do you get, how do you get your data engineers and so on to take the time out of their day to help you with this mission, to push this rock forward?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't sit here and pretend that I've got 900 people on the end of a stick doing whatever I want to do. So I think, to a degree, you always have to be selective and smart about the people you target and that you work with. And you often push on the doors where there's least resistance. So I think you look and you would be able pretty quickly across an organization to be able to understand who already is more active on social networks, who is already more active externally talking about the work they do, maybe with their own career hat firmly on, but they're kind of building a reputation, building a profile. So they're already out there comfortable with those channels. So it's maybe leaning into these individuals first off as demonstrators and using their greater confidence and understanding to start the process. I mean, my experience has been that, it's doing this sort of stuff, it's a pretty compelling story that's hard to argue with. I think on a very basic level, every employee understands that, because they've all been there, they understand that the more they know about what it's like inside an organization, the more helpful that is to them when they're thinking about whether that's the right home for them. We've all made, I say we, speaking for all of us, but a lot of us have made bad hiring decisions or bad career decisions based on maybe not having all of the information that we could have done. And so I think people understand there's a massive value to offering that, and then to understanding that the more we can do to support that, the more people join the organization that know exactly what to expect, that know exactly how we work, that understand exactly the demands and the challenges. Those people are more likely to stay. They're more likely to thrive. They're more likely to be good colleagues to work with because they get it. They know the mission. They're kind of bought into it. And so then you suddenly start to be able to say, well, hang on, that's good for me. That's good for my teams. That's good for our profitability. That's good for productivity. That's good for my sanity to have more people around me that get it and that want to work here. So I think that sort of human business case is a relatively straightforward one to make. Probably the biggest challenge which you hit on at the start is creating the time, the space, the room in order to make it happen, to move people from, God, yeah, I like the idea, but look at my diary. What can I do, into a position where some of those obstacles and some of those challenges, certainly around confidence, around what can I do, around I don't have the time. That's my job, is to roll as many of those back as I can. But I think, yeah, in broad terms, I think, individuals understand the benefit to them of hiring better people more quickly, and they can start to, even on a very selfish level, they can see how that would be a benefit to them in the long term.
Do you think in terms of employer branding in general, like even after you have all this infrastructure in place and like the buy-in from those certain people, and they're committed for those reasons, because, everybody obviously wants a better organization and so on. And this isn't even a fintech specific question, but do you think that companies have an issue with sort of authenticity? Like they're trying to sell this huge brand story about what it's like to work there and so on. They want to put the company in its best possible light, but then there's also, every company has its realities in terms of, working for them and stuff like that. And you kind of have to walk that tightrope, thread that needle, whatever metaphor you want to slam in there. What do you think is sort of the best approach to that authenticity? Like how can companies like get out there and be authentic, while also kind of selling reasons why people would want to potentially work there. It seems to me like it's a real conundrum, and I'm not sure. I mean, you obviously have this huge survey view of it, but I mean, whether companies are doing it right in general or whether it's a problem, I'm just curious about that because it seems very intractable.
I don't disagree, and I don't think anybody's kind of quite cracked yet where that right line is, because on the one hand, that authenticity, that honesty is supportive of better hiring because candidates understand what they're getting into. But equally, rightly, marketing come knocking on your door if all of your stuff going out is talking about challenges within the organization, and customers are starting to see that, investors are starting to see that, and you start to have a wider brand reputation challenge potentially that tramples over all over that authenticity argument. But I mean, I think where organizations tend to get to, and I think it's similar for us, is that there is a conversation about the degree to which honesty is complete honesty is fine, and that might often be topic based. So issues around for example, diversity and inclusion tend to be quite contentious. They tend to make executives and individuals across organizations quite uncomfortable. And there's still a sort of a lack of certainty. So I think real bravery and real openness around challenges there and what's being done is still quite difficult to make happen, because it needs to happen at an organizational level. And I've worked before where talent wanted to take the lead and really get out there and sort of set our stall out and be very clear. But because the rest of the organization wasn't behind us, wasn't in lockstep with that, you end up creating a disconnect where the audience isn't sure if you're that one thing or are you the other. You don't seem to be a single organization. So I don't trust that message or that message now. But I think there are topics certainly around like the pressures of work. For example, if I sort of pick up Mambu, where because of our growth trajectory, the speed of the growth, what happens as you transition through 100, then 300, then 600 employees, I think talking about the challenges that brings to culture, to connectedness, at the same time as sort of talking about the steps that the organization is looking at in order to sort of mediate some of those challenges. I think that is sort of authentic, that's real, that's happening, but it's not such an uncomfortable feeling topic. It doesn't feel like a topic where you're likely to sort of unintentionally alienate entire communities or accidentally say the wrong thing. It's just, a reality of kind of life here that the audience might to a degree expect if they thought about, what happens in those kind of organizations or have worked in one before. But I think that's different to being prepared to say, look, there's things happening here. We're kind of battling with this idea of we want to offer the people that work here real flexibility about when they work, that real sense that we're innovating around what the working day and the working week looks like. But we're also trying to grow the organization at 50, 60, 70% a year. And we're trying to grow, we're adding hundreds to the workforce each year. And we're trying to maintain a culture that worked for 200. Does it still work for 600, 700? So all of those kind of conversations, I think, again, but from my point of view, certainly it's less about candidates, I think, expecting an organization to A, be perfect, or B, all have all the answers. But I think what candidates respond to is an organization that's prepared to ask the questions and sort of recognize the challenge and ask the questions and almost show your way. It's like the maths homework you used to get, where it's like, it's one thing to get an answer. What we're really interested in is, what was your process to get to that answer? Show you're working out. What are you doing? How does that manifest itself? Because that's culture in action. So I think it's that. I don't think any organization's got it perfect. I don't think they ever will, because there is, as you say, there is always that tension between radical openness and sort of the reputation of the organization and its share price, investors looking at it, customers sort of taking a view on challenges and worrying about. So there is always that balance absolutely defined. And I think it's just about, at least in our world, sort of selecting the topics that you're prepared to go after, put your hand up, own them, and walk candidates through that journey.
I think it seems broader tech that DEI is one of those areas where, in terms of employer branding, companies, however reluctantly, they like, especially the big ones, your Googles and your Metas and so on, will raise their hands and say, we have a diversity problem. We have a DEI issue that we're trying to solve through X, Y, and Z, whether it's adjusting their talent pipeline or what have you. But it seems like that's one of those issues that people are willing to sort of own, or companies rather are willing to own in that space. And that's always an interesting thing to see. That the issue though becomes, at least in a DEI context, maybe in the context of other issues as well, how many years can a company go and say, oh, we're still working on it, and we'll get there eventually, but we swear, next year, like, we'll have a better, a more diverse employee mix. In video games, the video game industry, it's a similar thing with crunch time, where in terms of employer branding, all these giant game studios constantly try to sell themselves to developers as, oh, we're better on work-life balance. We're better on, there's no longer the 300-hour crunch time where you're not going to see your family for the next 8 months because you're producing Red Dead Redemption 5 or whatever. But it seems that as time goes on, those companies, they keep saying we're improving in terms of their branding, but they never quite reach it. And I mean, do you think, in terms of when a company is trying to present its branding and so on, at a certain point, I mean, you can own things, but you do have to deliver eventually, right? Or else you're going to lose people. I mean, is that a thing? I mean, how long can a brand sort of say we're working on it before they kind of have to really show some sort of result?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Showing some sort of result. The trick probably is in, again, how you set up that topic and how you sort of level the expectations. So, what is the thing that you're working towards? And I think if you get to like a lot of organisations in the UK are sort of working towards now is sort of gender parity on pay and equal representation on boards and things. So those are real hard numbers that they're working to, and there are already sort of conversations about the way it's tracking. These things are going to be difficult to make happen in the times that the organisations have committed to. So I think there does become a point at which candidates or audiences certainly would start to question the ability of the organisations to deliver the goals that they've set. But again, if you're in a position where those conversations, or to a degree, the work that's being done, including the setbacks that you face, is something that you're prepared to talk about, then I think, again, that becomes easier. I get it. From my point of view, I don't look for an organization that's perfect and necessarily that hits each of its goals, but where it falls short, it's interesting to know why it thinks it happened, what's it going to do about them. Not that it's buried under the carpet. You reset the objective, pretend the last one never happened, and just kick on. More, what have you? Why did that happen? What outside factors? What internal factors? What unexpected thing were you not prepared for that happened? Now you've seen it. Now you understand it. This is how we're resetting, and now we go. So again, it's that I can see that all happening, and I can see that it is, with a lot of these things, it's not like, unless I missed it, it's not like we used to have sort of gender parity on boards. It went away, and now it's just about getting back. It's like we'd never had it. So it's all kind of learning and trying that and going, shit, that didn't work. That wasn't right. What about this over here? Oh my God, that's gone the wrong way. Actually, this sort of, it's all kind of a test and learn a little bit based on logic and common sense. But I think in a lot of these topics, organizations are kind of learning on the fly as they still try to run and grow their organizations, because even with these sort of mandates and expectations, nobody's sort of on the sidelines going, and it's all right if we don't make a profit for 5 years while we focus on it, or it's all right if some of our sort of customer service levels drop a little bit while we're achieving this. All of that has to sort of stay. The growth has to maintain. So you're kind of doing it on top. So again, it's just a little bit, I think, about that willingness to share where you aim to get to and where you fall short, why you think that is, and what your what you're doing about it. Again, a lot of that shouldn't be reputationally damaging because it won't be intentional things you did wrong. It's all about you learn. When you're building out a business for the people side, the product, the customers, whatever, you're kind of learning and iterating all the time. And I think on the outside looking in, that's the really fascinating bit, is not the shiny finished bit. It's how did you get there? How did you go from an idea to a product? How did you go from 0 sales to 1 million sales? That's the kind of really interesting bit. And all of the stuff that went wrong along the way is the really interesting stuff. So it is I think is one of the reasons why employer brand, we now have more time with marketing and with other functions in the organization, because suddenly our work can have a much more direct impact on what they're doing as well. But it's important. And I think, I also think, certainly when it comes to diversity, certainly when it comes to sustainability and certain other topics that previously might have been sort of in the, the world of the soft employer brand, you can talk about that stuff. Now customers want to know about your sustainability credentials before they sign up. Investors are interested in, well, where are you with gender equality, with socio-economic issues, with disability? Where are you? Because, that's kind of for our portfolio decisions, we're looking at stuff like that. So suddenly these are mainstream issues, and that encourages, I think, an extra degree of openness that maybe wasn't there before.
It also seems that it almost be a channel challenge, pardon the alliteration, to a certain extent, just because a lot of companies, when it comes to employer branding and so on, and these issues that we've been talking about, they might, at least traditionally, maybe issue a single blog posting where, this is the situation and we're still learning from it, and it's a progression and we pledge in the future we're going to do this, and that one blog post would be the only time that you would see anything like that. But now there's trendiferous things like TikTok and so on. I don't want to discount them completely, but I also want to, sort of acknowledge that there are things other than sort of the shiny baubles out there when it comes to kind of conveying your message. But when you're trying to show that the company is learning, when you're trying to convey that this is all progression and that you're getting better and improving and that, you're a great place to work as a result of that, what kind of channels are most effective do you think, in terms of kind of conveying that message in a way that really sinks in? Because people are so inundated with information. They might not necessarily come back to the corporate blog again. They might not come back to the corporate YouTube channel. They might not talk to an employee more than once. Like, how do you convey that sense of story in a way that sustains, where you have people kind of coming back? I'm just looking for the stickiness, kind of. How do you do that?
It's another good one, the perfect answer to which would probably earn you enough to retire pretty quickly.
True, actually, yeah.
I think, for us, LinkedIn is massive, remains massive, just because that's where the audience, a lot of our audience lives, and it's where a lot of our people are already very active. So in part, the corporate page, yes, but actually the main part, again, is enabling Mambuvians to do their thing on LinkedIn. It's their kind of channel of choice. But equally, we've got technical blog content on things like Medium, because that's where, for that sort of topic area, for that kind of discussion area, that kind of debate, that's where that should happen. So we should be there rather than expect everybody to come to the corporate blog or say we only talk about stuff on LinkedIn. We have Facebook and Instagram that we use, but between these four walls, it's effectively more of a glorified internal comms channel, where most of your sort of followers are sort of already colleagues, and actually they're interested in what's happening in the different offices, the events that are happening that are showcased there. So I think for us, in terms of the channel that is by far the most successful, by far the most logical for us to be on, remains LinkedIn, and that's not perfect, but it is the right place for us to be. The trick, I think, for us is to be then interesting enough, is to be engaging enough, is to offer information on there that's of enough value for people to want to engage with, to comment on, to share, to recommend to a friend, that sort of stuff. So it sort of becomes, at least at the moment, it's less probably of a channel question where we're not locked into LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is kind of what we've got. So it's then about, right, how do we make sure that the stories we're telling, the content we're sharing on LinkedIn is interesting, valuable, likely to create conversation, likely to encourage people to want to look out for us, likely to encourage followership, that sort of stuff.
The it's platforms like LinkedIn. The benefit, you can see, you have your conversation threads, you have people who are reacting to it with the cute little icons and things like that. And it's same, also YouTube videos. There's all these KPIs and these metrics that can apply. Um, and when I've been talking to people about employer branding, there's this temptation that they feel that they're pushing against constantly, where the senior leadership teams and so on, they want, and I mentioned this before, that they want sort of the hard metrics. They want, these LinkedIn posts got 100,000 views, and so therefore we're going to declare it done and so on. But that's obviously not the whole mission in terms of engagement and things like that. What do you sort of see as, especially for companies that are starting out, that are trying to get a handle on employer branding, like what do you see as kind of the true KPIs or measurements? What should you actually be looking for at the bottom of that funnel? Like once you've done everything in terms of like conveying the message as an organization.
So the I guess the metrics that I'm most interested in trying to affect for our organization are those that bridge that gap between awareness and action. So in the simplest terms, and this is probably true of an employer brand person at a more established brand, but my goal is to try and make sure everyone in the world has heard of Mambu. Now that's a frankly ludicrous goal that I won't ever achieve, but it should
You
be
never know.
what I aim for, right? That everybody
Yeah.
has heard of Mambu, and further, it should be my goal that I tell the entire world enough about what it's really like to work here in our different roles and different offices and different teams that 99.999% look at it and go, well, that's not for me, don't like the sound of that. But that little sliver then are the ones that say, yes, that's what I've been waiting for. This is the kind of place I want to work for. I love the culture, I love the product, I love what it's trying to do, I love the mission, whatever. But that is the goal. So what I'm then looking at is, right, how do I measure that? So to a degree, it's reduced. I want fewer applications. So I don't want so many applications from individuals who like the idea of fintech, who like the idea of working for a unicorn, and want in. What I want is that conversion from application to, we're going to put this person in front of a hiring manager, to go up, so that more and more people coming through, they've got the right skills, but also in that first qualifying conversation with the talent team, they're able to share a bit about motivations, and that motivation lines up with our organization because they've done the research, they know what we're about, and it lines up with what drives them. So metrics like that, which are not necessarily about bringing more applications in, because that just creates work and ruins the lives and the days of applicants that aren't successful. Fewer applications, but those applications are more likely to come through to interview, to be put in front of a hiring manager, to say basically, even if you're not right for this role right now, you're close enough that at some point you and us could very well get together. Therefore, even if this doesn't work out, we can bring you into the sort of community, into the talent pool. So then next roles that come up, I get to a point. So the halcyon future is that, eventually we don't have to be out on LinkedIn sending emails with new roles and stuff. Everybody we need, we already know, they already know us, and all we've got to do is be able to sort of contact them in there, rather than sort of going back and kind of re-meeting them and then getting confused because they talked to us 6 months ago and we seem to have forgotten that. So that's the kind of feature. So those are, I think, when we look at sort of leadership and their need for hard metrics, I think things like that, where you can start to say, and if we reduce, our sort of application to hire ratio or application to interview ratio from X to Y, that starts to have a resource cost saving. It starts to have a cost saving. You can start to, probably quite loosely, but start to put some numbers to that I think sort of talks or sits on top of the argument that it means we every candidate is having a better experience. Nobody's going into a black hole. Nobody's getting into a process that, or getting into making an application for an organization that it turns out wouldn't be a good fit for them. Fewer people are joining and then sort of shooting off 3 months or 6 months in because it turns out we sold them a turkey. Those kind of things stop happening. That's sort of my job. So when we get, so one of my hobby horses is going on about just the employer brand being stuck in the world of talent attraction or acquisition, because that isn't really what we should be there to do. We should be there to make sure that we're not just attracting talent in, that we're attracting the right talent in, and that we're kindly and gently persuading the remainder of those individuals that we wouldn't be good for them, regardless of how shiny, regardless of what our valuation is and how they think, oh God, equity there would be great. That won't make it right for you. You'd be better off somewhere else, and it's better. You know that now, and we know that now before any of us sort of invest time and energy and oxygen in it. So that's kind of, sorry, it's quite a long answer, but in terms of those hard
perfect
metrics, I think those are the key ones where you could say, yeah, the brand is doing its job. The awareness is where it should be. People know, and they know enough, not just the name, not just the headline or the valuation. They know enough to make really informed decisions about whether we're right for them or not.
And when you're, in terms of, I mean, because you're expanding so rapidly and you're in this unicorn phase, does that translate into kind of a constant retooling on your end, like on a strategic and a tactical level? I mean, when you're in the rapid growth phase, do you constantly kind of rethinking like kind of the branding and so on? Or is it one of those things where once you set it fairly early on, I mean, you can adjust the strategy on a tactical level, but like strategically, like you're sort of locked in. I mean, is it a really super malleable thing? Is it something that's more kind of locked down? I mean,
I think, it tends to be a little bit of both. So I think, and interestingly, sort of just in the time I've been here, what I think the whole organization has realized is that in the pursuit of growth and in fulfilling customer demands and market opportunities, the organization has moved away probably a little bit from its original vision, its original mission, and that's become a little bit, I guess, diluted, for want of a better word. And actually getting to a certain stage of growth has been the perfect time for the whole organization, leadership team, founder included, to just stop and look at, all of the different directions we're now moving in and think about, well, what's right for us moving forward. Not that we expect where I thought we would be going on day 2 when I was, it was just me, would be, we have to stick to that because that's what I said on day 2 and I'm the founder. These things will change and will move, but equally, we're still the same organization. It's founded from the same principle. We were founded to do this. Now we might change slightly the definition of that, but that should still be what we live for. And so I think, in the time I'd been here, what I found a little bit is that, because everybody said when I was interviewing, having come from HSBC into they're like, the pace here really fast, just going, no, pace, like, brilliant, that's what I want, something a bit of pace, great. But what I think I'd probably always expected was that, okay, but it's this pace in a straight line. We all know exactly where we're going. And actually what tends to happen is that while that far point on the horizon might broadly stay the same, the path the organization thinks it will take to get there changes quite a lot. There's lots of forces that can happen. Individuals joining an organization of our size in certain roles can completely change the perspective and the picture that we look at a market or an opportunity. So you're quite often shifting quite quickly some certain elements of your activation, some key elements of your messaging, in order to adapt to the fact that, we're pretty agile in the market. We're not sort of locked in yet to just being this or just being that. Actually, we're still kind of exploring those limitations and boundaries. But I think it's always in service of that original mission, which is about making banking more accessible to more people. And as long as everything we do falls back and you can look at it and go, is this going to be in service of that? Then I think we can nod and go, then it's probably in our scope. Let's go and have a look at it. But if it's like, that's, going going there will not be in service of this, then that helps us make those decisions. So I think you still get an awful lot of agility, but it's still with that kind of horizon point as the constant, which I think is what any good, and that's not the EVP, that's the whole sort of brand proposition for the organization, but that's what every good EVP should be as well, is that decision making, not that thing that locks you in, but the thing that gives you the freedom to explore other ways of doing things, because as long as it's in service of that thing, you can really play with it and explore and push those boundaries rather than feel like it's something that binds you and locks you into just one way of doing things. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point earlier was, you just don't know what the business will decide, and they make decisions quickly. There's no big committees or 6-month consultations here. If somebody feels really strongly about something, a couple of people get on board, it's like, bang, let's try it. Let's go. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but we go. And so suddenly then all of us are up, right, we're off. And then that might put the brakes and go, actually, we've rethought it. Now we're going to get, you kind of have to, it teaches you some real skill about, just on a human level, not taking the shit personally. If somebody comes and goes, right, all of that work you've done, that's brilliant. Yeah, scrap it. We're now over here. You just have to go in service of the company, and you go again, because it's what everybody's doing, and it's part of the fun. But going back to the stuff about candidate messaging, it's exactly what they need to know, that you're coming here and saying strategy is great, but you might need to set sort of a dozen strategies in a year. Don't expect it to be one and then your work is done. You come in here to work strategy. That's a constantly shifting set of rules that you might not experience elsewhere. And it's important that coming in, you understand that, want to work in that, won't take it personally, won't throw your toys out, won't constantly put the brakes on and insist you keep doing it one way, because that's not how the organization works. So yeah, it's and I think that's what it should be. I think the proposition should always be agile and an opportunity to invent and challenge and innovate, not a set of pillars that kind of forms a prison and locks you in. That to me is sort of the opposite of what it should be there to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it just should be. I mean, especially now, given all the, there's a fair amount of economic uncertainty, there's turbulence, et cetera, and so that sort of agility and that mobility seems to be really incredibly key right
Yeah,
now, especially
exactly.
when you're a unicorn or a startup or in fintech or anything like that.
Exactly. I mean, candidates can't sit still. Their circumstances are being changed every week, every couple of weeks by, the world, economics, all of this kind of stuff. So their needs, demands, expectations change. If you're not an organization that can understand that, empathize with that, and look at how can we reflect that, shall we understand that, how can we twist what we're doing in order to accommodate that, then you miss massive opportunities. And it also speaks volumes about the culture of an organization, I think, if you're not attuned to those kind of changes and prepared to change yourself. So yeah, I mean, that for us is a massive factor.
Do you think, I mean, the term employer branding has been around for a really long time. Do you think that companies, I don't want to say mainstream because it is something that a lot of companies recognize they need to do and so on, but do you think that leadership and so on has kind of internalized the need for this on kind of a broad level? Do you think companies everywhere like recognize the need for it, or do you think it's still kind of a push that, hey, you need to be doing this, you need to be conveying this in order to optimize hiring and retention and all the rest of the stuff that makes organizations survive?
Yeah, I think so. I think it varies across organizations and industries. I think individual leaders that I've worked with really get it. Others, it's a bit of a harder sell. I think, but in broad terms, I think it's more recognized that it's something that we should have, something a lot of other people have. It's probably something we should have, but it's still too frequently bucketed in as a tool through which we attract talent. So we need it because we need more applications. We need it because we need to, improve the numbers coming in. That we need to be more attractive to people. We need more CVs, and that's where I think it's quite a sort of narrow focus, and it fixes employer brand in a organizationally, you're reporting in to sort of just one line, so it's hard to have that cross organization access, which I think you need to have the right conversations. So I think the real challenge, and it's one I have in a small organization, so I know it's one that you have even more so as the organization gets bigger and those silos get more entrenched, is how you can demonstrate that, because in my view, and it's not necessarily the popular or common one, and obviously I'd say it because I do this work, but in my view, talent acquisition or employer brand should not be in service of talent acquisition. Talent acquisition should be in service of the employer brand, because the brand says, this is who we are, this is what it's like to work here, this is where we're going from a people perspective, these are our business objectives, and this is how we as a brand for people articulate those business objectives. Now, that means for you, TA, we need to be talking about this. These are the key messaging bits. These are the kind of profiles we need to go and get. You're off doing that. Then internally, what's our employee experience? How are we living up to these standards? Are there any gaps? Should be having leadership conversations about their enablement and understanding. And that's the level that it should sit at, rather than at the moment, I think there is a pretty good acceptance. There are more jobs in employer branding than ever before. There are more people doing it. There is a much broader acceptance that, yes, we should have employer brand. We recognize that there is an employer brand, or actually a lot of people think you still need to create one rather than just have somebody in there doing something deliberately with it. But yeah, we need somebody or a team in to do this stuff, but there's still too much for me, that sort of focused emphasis that this is about attracting talent. This is about letting people know what a great place we are to work. Go and tell them why we're great. Go and tell them and give me more applications, because that's what I need. It's like, well, A, that's not the problem, and B, that's not what the employer brand can do, or it is, but it's a massive limiting of the potential that employer brand has to impact the business. To my mind, the employer brand has the potential to impact the bottom line of an organization, the profitability of an organization. More people that are better engaged, better equipped, productive more quickly, likely to stay longer because they're happier, is going to make your company much, much more money than if you get rubbish people recruited. You get a lot more applications, but it's of people that aren't really engaged, that don't really get the culture, that leave sooner, that don't deliver as much when they are here. The difference in value is marked. So, done well, you can drive profitability, and there shouldn't be a single member on any board anywhere that isn't interested in having that conversation about an activity or a focus area that can deliver that kind of change. But it's a big step. Like you say, it is kind of, employer brand's been around for a while, but compared to, I guess, corporate marketing, corporate branding, it's still a relative infant. And I think it's just going to be those steps where you show your value, you slightly increase your scope, you show your value, slightly increase your scope, and hopefully, over time, you'll suddenly have access to a wider portfolio and be given that trust because you've demonstrated that you can deliver in the other areas. So that's one of the things that's one of the drums I bang, mainly because I'm aware of my own age and I want to get to that level before I go. Yes, finally we're where we should be. But I think that is, to me, that's the potential. That's the real opportunity that still exists with employer brand that's untapped. And I think we're supposed to be storytellers, so we need to be better at telling our own story and being able to get that access and demonstrate that the potential we have to really impact the direction of an organization and to be able to offer that advice and partnership and consultancy rather than just be told, get me more CVs.
Yeah, especially in tech, where it comes down to the people, the specialists. You're the machine learning expert who's the only person who can do a certain kind of modeling that you need in that moment. So it's really a powerful thing. So thank you. I appreciate the time. I know that you're super busy, and that it's complete and total chaos. So taking 45 minutes, I know it's a big deal, but this will. I think it's a lot of nebulousness around employer brand. I think this is going to really help some people in terms of just getting some focus in their own ideation about all of this.
Yeah. Well, what I love about the area, and you'll know this, I'm sure, from other conversations you've had, is there isn't a right, there isn't a wrong. There's just a bunch of people, an increasing bunch of people with different ideas, experiences, thoughts, and you sort of bounce off each other. You fuck a bunch of stuff up. You try new things. That's kind of what makes it interesting. Is it's not like, well, there's a path you follow. Don't deviate from the path, or it won't work. What worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. That's kind of the fun. So all of these opportunities to share ideas, to have these conversations. Even this sort of podcast 5 years ago wouldn't be happening. There wasn't enough probably people and interest. Now there's interest. So again, a big part of the job, I think, for me, internally but also externally to a degree, is that that enablement, that get more people involved. Let's have more conversations. Let's raise the visibility. Let's talk about what it can and can't do. Let's argue about where it should and shouldn't sit. This is all great stuff. So thank you again for the opportunity and the invite. It was, as I thought it would be, a really interesting and fun conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. And that's it, folks. Talking to Stephen is really illuminating, especially in tech where unemployment is low and the competition for talent remains really aggressive. Employer branding could mean the difference between companies securing the right technology professionals they need at the right time or potentially missing out. And missing out on talent can have huge, catastrophic effects on a company's bottom line and even potentially its survival. Here are a couple of takeaways from our discussion to keep in mind. First, employer branding isn't just about pulling in applications. A huge volume of applications will just burn everybody's time. Ideally, you want to tell the world about your employer branding in a way where maybe you draw in fewer applications, but a higher percentage of those applications are from candidates who match well with your organization. The employer brand has the potential to impact the bottom line of an organization. When you hire the right talent, they're more productive and more likely to stay longer because they're happier. If you're working in employer branding, it's important to educate those around you, especially senior leadership, about the very real impact of your work. Figuring out the ideal employer branding strategy isn't something that'll happen quickly. It takes time, patience, resources, and buy-in at all levels of the organization. If you're interested in improving your employer branding, it's key to foster a culture of experimentation around it. By figuring out what works and what doesn't, you can eventually develop employer branding channels that work really well for your organization. And with that, we'll see you next time. And remember, Dice is your best resource to find the tech talent you need to fill your open roles, and for technologists, the best place to grow your tech career.